Hey there, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome to Chapter 2 of Liber Part 2, and this is the circle. So, to begin. With the Temple of the Magician established and consecrated as we analyzed in the previous video, now comes the magical circle that will be set upon the floor therein. Crowley writes, quote, "Once the circle is made and consecrated, the magician must not leave it, or even lean outside, lest he be destroyed by the hostile forces that are without." End quote. This is not arbitrary advice. Take for example the working of Frater O.V. on December 6, 1909 in the Algerian desert, when he and Frater P. invoked the cry of the 10th Aether, consequently evoking Choronzon, the devil who dwelleth within the abyss. They performed their work within an holy circle and triangle, consecrated with the dagger, light, and proper divine names of God. Pigeon blood was also used upon the triangle as offering, whether to seduce the devil alone to appear, or to help mark the boundaries of the triangle. I am not so certain, perhaps both. In the midst of the working, the devil bade the scribe within the circle, Frater O.V., to come past the boundary of the circle through several cunning lies and tricks. Frater O.V. was not so easily beguiled, else he would have been possessed or killed, as the devil admits, quote, "And wert thou not protected by the holy names of God and the circle, I would rush upon thee and tear thee. For when I made myself like unto a beautiful woman, if thou hadst come to me, I would have rotted thy body with the pox, and thy liver with cancer. I would have torn off thy testicles with my teeth. And if I had seduced thy pride, and thou hadst bidden me to come into the circle, I would have trampled thee under foot, and for 1,000 years shouldst thou have been but one of the tapeworms that is in me. And if I had seduced thy pity, and thou hadst poured one drop of water without the circle, then would I have blasted thee with flame. But I was not able to prevail against thee." End quote. So already there's a good example of the importance of a magical circle, its protection, and a lot else, as we'll see. So let us examine the magical circle and seek to discover how it works, in what ways it is employed, its various appearances, and what else we may think upon. First off, the circle is a physical boundary that separates the work being done from the material world. A physically drawn circle upon the floor is just that and no more, unless the light sanctions it as an actual border. This is done astrally. The circle, as seen by the magician doing work from within it, affects the mind in such a way as to unconsciously inform the magi that what they are doing is separate from the rest of the world. In addition, once the physical circle is connected with an astral circle, what lies outside is of the lower realms. That within it is of the higher. What takes place within a magic circle is divine work of heavenly realms. The circle obviously must first be within the temple, being neither too big or too small, according to its dimensions of the temple, as well as what work will be performed within its confines. This, of course, is barred if you're outside, obviously. There are innumerable versions of the magical circle, as these photos will show you. The most popular circle is that illustrated in the Lemegeton of Solomon to evoke the 72 Goetic spirits. In this chapter 2 of Liber Abba, Crowley gives the Thelemic circle with divine names of the deities of the Book of the Law, as depicted in the thumbnail. We will discuss which to use in a moment. First, let's answer, why a circle instead of some other lineal figure? Crowley gives a list of answers thus. 1. He affirms thereby his identity with the infinite. 2. He affirms the equal balance of his working, since all points on the circumference are equidistant from the center. And 3. He affirms the limitation implied by his devotion to the great work. He no longer wanders about aimlessly in the world. Now, the point in the circle as I defined in my video on hermetic shapes are synonymous with Kether. They each are only one. The universe is one, and man is one. How then can they be anything but the same? The circle is but one point going round and round eternally. Within this space all things happen. It is then a perfect symbol of holiness, the highest, the first and last, Alpha and Omega, as Kether is in Malkuth. Now this chapter 2 of Liber Abba, Crowley defines the dylemic circle, and I will differentiate when speaking about his circle or another version. So before that, I just want to say one other point regarding another potentially overlooked symbol of the circle. That is, that the magician does the work in the circle at its very center, and that they are after all one with the circle. They then make up the point in the center of the circle, and together with the circle and them as the point, they make the solar glyph. This point in the circle, symbolizing the sun, in regards to the magical circle, symbolically represents that the sun is the penultimate physical symbol of the divine light of Kether. The sun is the most brilliant physical thing the ancients could observe, and thus it was viewed not as God, as many pagans worship it, but as the best physical representation of the light, because of its light, heat, life-sustaining properties, and its overall intensity. Then, that the circle in the magician represents Sol as the symbol of the divine light is another reason that it has such a holy power, as to be able to keep out unwanted and malicious spirits. So to continue, Crowley writes about his circle depicted, quote, "The center of the circle is the center of the Tau of 10 squares, which is in the midst, as shown in the illustration. The Tau and the circle together make one form of the rosy cross, the uniting of subject and object, which is the great work, and which is symbolized sometimes as this cross and circle, sometimes as the lingam yoni, sometimes the ankh or crux ansata, sometimes by the spire and nave of a church or temple, and sometimes as a marriage feast, mystic marriage, spiritual marriage, chemical nuptials, and in 100 other ways. Whatever the form chosen, it is the symbol of the great work. This place of his working therefore declares the nature and object of the work." End quote. To briefly summarize Crowley's circle, the Tau cross in the center has 10 squares representing the 10 Sephiroth, and the work is performed on the central square representing Malkuth, which is in the very center of the circle. There are 3 diamonds around the Tau cross, making up an invisible triangle. The diamonds represent the yoni, and the triangle, or the invisible triangle rather, with its 3 sides and points represents the mother Bina. The magical lamp of the temple hangs from the ceiling above the square for Tifereth, again symbolizing the light of Kether, which by the path of Gimel descends directly into Tifereth, which, as I mentioned earlier, represents the divine light and the sun as interconnected symbols. The circle has divine names inscribed upon it of the Thelemic pantheon. An editor's note in the back of the book reads, quote, "The names about the circle are from the Thelemic theogony, with 2 exceptions. Perdurabo is Crowley's motto in the outer order of Aa. Layla was Layla Waddle, Sora Agatha of Aa, his magical consort at the time of publication. It is customary for each magician to personalize this design after Crowley's example. Thus, the initiate might replace Perdurabo with their own motto, and Layla with either the magical name or motto of their own partner if in a relationship with the magician, or perhaps the name of their holy guardian angel. The circle is green, and I would recommend taking a look at Liber Zadi for an explanation of why the circle is green, and it starts off with definitions of the color green regarding the Lema, if you go to Liber Zadi. And the names inside the circle are in vermilion. Vermilion is of the path of Shin, which is fire and spirit, and in Liber 777 we can find this definition for path 31 regarding vermilion. It says, path 31, fire, being pure, retains its original vermilion, but it has become capable of being the home of the crimson and emerald of Bina, and her sphere of joy, Venus. It is no longer a destructive element, but the proper abode of love, both in its higher and lower forms. About the circle are 9 pentagrams. These each can hold a lamp, and they, quote, keep off those forces of darkness which might otherwise break in, end quote. I do believe you should change the number of pentagrams and lamps around the circle in regards to the type of working you are performing, i.e. 9 is Luna, suitable for working with the moon, 8 for Mercury, 7 for Venus, etc. Interestingly, about the lamps, candles instead were used prior to lamps, and they were made of fat of an enemy slain by the magician, or better yet, quote, sometimes the birth-strangled babes, i.e., thoughts slain before they could arise into consciousness, end quote. Now, this merely symbolizes that one must have the practice of dharana firmly mastered, and the candles represent thoughts that the magician has cast out from his mind, as they were not in conformity with his will and the great work, and so by casting them out they are thrown into the candles. This is fitting, as the candles are placed outside the circle and are susceptible to whatever entities are not permitted within it, meaning they have unclean spirits that approach them. Quote, birth-strangled babes, end quote, could very well be just that, as it said, which may have been used, wrongly I would add, in medieval times, but I would wager that the candles contained ingredient X harvested by the rite of sex magic and mixed into the candle. This chapter of Liber Alba then says that the candles today are better off made of beeswax, which is, quote, also used in the construction of a pantacle, and this forms the link between the two symbols. The pantacle is food of the magus, and some of it he gives up in order to give light to that which is without, end quote. These lights outside the circle attract hostile enemies. By bringing them close to the divine names inscribed on the circle, and that they then bear witness to whatever ceremony is being performed, they are being shown, quote, the first inkling of the great work, which they too must perform some day, end quote. This is good karmically for the magician, as they are helping direct low spirits towards methods of attainment. It reminds me of a saying I once heard that I will paraphrase. The angels, being above humans, aid and assist them by helping to raise them towards God. As angels are responsible for humans, so humans are responsible for lower, quote, hostile spirits, and should likewise do as the angels, attempting to give low spirits the means to become more godlike. This is why, when magicians use, or rather misuse, low spirits for wants and attaining vices, it not only hurts the spirit, but doubly hurts the magician, who should be instructing the low spirit on how to act in conformity with the divine light. Now, I've come a bit of the way off topic, so to get back on track, I want to talk about the different types of magical circles that were depicted earlier, and just one or two other ideas. So to get these out of the way, you could construct, like there are some pagan groups, they simply use salt on the floor. Other groups use incense, and then we're going to talk about actual physical circles. In regards to the many circles that you'll see depicted on your screen now, there are so many. I just want to say it's important that you pick the right circle if you're using one that's already been made, based on what rite you're doing. In what circumstances one circle might be better than another, so let's go into that. I would first off say that the Solomonic circle is probably good for nearly any ceremony, and if you were doing magic of the Lemegeton, I would definitely opt for it over any other. If you are doing Thelemic rituals, such as the Star Ruby and Star Sapphire rituals, daily Liber Resh, Liber Samek, etc., I would recommend using the circle Crowley depicts in this chapter of Liber Alba that we've been discussing so far, and that I've been calling the Thelemic circle. Past that, the sky's the limit, or rather your imagination and ingenuity are the limit. When talking to a brother years back, he said something I wholeheartedly agree with. That is, when creating a ritual, the type of magic, or in this case the magical tool such as the circle that you are creating, it should simply make sense. Secondly, you should be able to explain it in simple enough terms that a child could understand it logically. Keep that in mind and you won't go wrong devising and creating your own magical circle. To give a couple of other examples though, should you be working with the seven kings of Edom or Qliphothic princes or classes of low vibrational entities, there is the floor of the Vault of Adepts, which is pretty interesting, that you might use for Qliphothic low spirit type workings. And I've also seen another version of an 11-pointed star, but I'm not going to show a picture of that because it's copyrighted by another group. I want to just mention on the floor of the Adepts, their circle is very interesting to me. So it has a heptagon in place of the circle as the boundary marker. This version has a 7-headed dragon Leviathan, with each head inside one of the triangles of the heptagram within it, and below each head is a different Qliphothic prince or class of beings written in Hebrew, etc., etc. Some of these range from Gashakile to Gogiel, Samiel, and Lilith, etc. Towards the center is an inverse triangle, and within that is a rosy cross. Then, like I've said, I've seen another Cliffoltic circle with 11 points, and its boundary, instead of a circle, has a dragon eating its own tail. And I just say that up to try to inspire you if you're thinking of ever creating your own thing, your own magical circles. Sky really is the limit. There are various other circles available online, and they might serve your needs or else inspire you to make something new. I even saw the flower part of the rosy cross with Hebrew characters in each petal properly, that I think would work well with either HGA workings or magic that uses a sigil that was made by the rose of the rosy cross. So yeah, the magical circle can take on very many forms of appearance when drawn, painted, or stitched. In rituals of ceremonial magic, it is very important because it gives a much more profound amount of protection and also separation from the material world and, quote, hostile entities. When a magician of the Hermetic art performs the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram and hexagram, they are establishing a circle in the astral realm. Even when with a physically drawn magical circle, one that's consecrated with holy oil in a ceremony of its own, the LBRs are pretty much mandatory for keeping out unwanted thoughts and energy, establishing an astral circle, and putting the magician in the proper state of consciousness. Crowley writes in Chapter 8 of Magic and Theory and Practice, quote, "This circle may then be initiated by a circumambulation, during which the magician invokes the names of God that are upon it." End quote. When using a physical magical circle, I look at doing the LBRs as activating the circle and starting the ceremony, much like flipping a light switch. If one is doing basic rituals that do not require such a high level of protection, the creation of an astral circle as such is usually enough to do one's rituals. I hold the notion that the protective properties of the circle cast by the LBRs, lesser banishing rituals, last for approximately 24 to 48 hours before deteriorating. And as mentioned, when doing magic within a circle, you are sending up smoke signals to all classifications of entities out in the nether. You essentially are becoming a light in the darkness. But these rituals give you protection, so you have nothing to fret about. But once these rituals wear off, that is when trouble arises for people either new or unwittingly doing ritual only sporadically. These days, when talking to someone new, I tell them right off, if they're going to start doing magic, then it is a commitment. If they're going to do it, then do it. The last thing I want to talk about is the concept of perfecting the circle. Crowley mentions it many times over the course of his magical writings. For example, in Chapter 14 of Magic and Theory and Practice on consecrations, Crowley has written verbatim, quote, "The circle of the magician will have been perfected by his habit of magical work." End quote. I look at it like this. Every time you cast a circle with the lesser banishing rituals, you are establishing a boundary of protection. Along with all the signs of silence, you're crystallizing your body of light more and more each and every time, so long as you are using the sign correctly. Along with all of the invocations I would think you are performing, as well as visual meditations such as the middle pillar exercise, over the course of many years, you build up a more and more permanent structure of light in you and about you. The more you discover about your nature, and the more you implement that knowledge, the more, quote, perfect your circle becomes. Perhaps Crowley simply meant the term to imply that one is doing their will. That may very well be the case. I personally heard the line and took it a step further, that as you do more and more to reinforce your magical circle and your body of light, the stronger it becomes, and eventually it gets to a point that you have a long-lasting, if not permanently built, magical protection and structure about you at all times. Should a star crash into you because they are attempting to swerve in their course, the more protection you have, the less injured you should be. I'll recount the story of a woman who spread gossip about me years ago, while I had been doing my magical regimen for a few years already very consistently. Her tossing negativity at me was literally like shooting a pellet at bulletproof glass. It bounced right off and shot her back instantly. What she had made up about happening to me and started spreading literally happened to her daughter just 2 days after. As a side note, before ending this topic, I thought of wedding rings. They represent the union of two beings. I find it poignant that the ring was chosen to represent this binding. It could, after all, have been a necklace or any other article for that matter, but no, it is a ring. That the circle represents union, that of heaven and earth, out and within, many other polarities. It's very fitting that a circle placed upon the ring fingers, either the left hand for Yesod, Luna, the genitals in the USA and some other places, or the right hand ring finger representing Tifereth, Sol, the heart, in much of Europe or elsewhere. I just think it's interesting that the ring, the circle, was chosen to represent this union, this mystical marriage. All of that said, the circle is most certainly a boundary from all sorts of hostile forces that may seek to entrap you. Don't let them. Perform your great work, whatever that may look like for you, and pay invading hostile spirits no mind. Build up your circle by following a regimen, and you'll be just fine. Love is the law. Love under will.